All right, good morning. It's wonderful to be with you guys. I do have a crazy adoption story that I get to share with you. It actually started 14 years ago on a treadmill at the gym. It was January 13th of 2010, and I had Wednesdays off. I'm in the healthcare industry. I'm a physical therapist, so I get to rehab patients from car accidents, back injuries, all sorts of joint and muscle pain. And Wednesdays were my day off, so I was running on the treadmill. But as you know, at gyms, there's TVs everywhere, right? Like you're bombarded by the news. And I typically don't watch the news because it's always bad. But I was being completely inundated by all of the images of the earthquake in Haiti that had just happened the day before. The buildings had been leveled, people's homes were destroyed, there was 300,000 people dead and another 200,000 people missing. It was the greatest loss of life the world has seen to date outside of war, the greatest natural disaster. And I just had tears streaming down my face as I'm on the treadmill. It was super awkward. I was like hoping that the people on the right and left of me were not watching, and I was trying to stay in the middle of the treadmill so I didn't slide off and do one of those crazy TikTok videos that you see and laugh at. But I realized at that moment that something had to change. My life had purpose. I needed to get to Haiti because I had skill sets that people needed. I could help with people who had amputees or amputations. I could rehab people after they'd had major injuries. And so I immediately started researching how to get on a medical missions team. They had closed the country to anyone but disaster relief personnel for the first few months, and so about 3 months afterwards, in April of 2010, my husband and I hopped on a missions team, and our lives would be forever changed. We fell in love with the country of Haiti, the people there. We got to do tent ministry. I got to help people with injuries, but I also got to see extreme poverty for the very first time. I had been a Christian my whole life. I had been on multiple trips to Mexicali, Mexico on spring break, but Haiti is different. Can I see a show of hands of anybody who's been to Haiti in this room? A couple of you. It's different. They are a fourth world country, and people are just living in poverty everywhere you look. The destruction of the earthquake only made it worse. And so we came back from that first trip changed. My husband quit his job and then was recruited to come back to Haiti to start a microfinance foundation. He moved to Haiti that summer of 2010. I stayed home because we had a house and we had pets and I had a full-time job, but I started gearing up to lead missions teams. And so back in Haiti, as my husband was doing all of the microfinance work of giving out small business loans, he also got to deliver food to multiple different orphanages in Haiti on a daily basis. And so he met our kids that are right here on the screen, James and Lori, at that orphanage. We had already talked about adoption. We'd been married about 3 years at this point, and we really felt like that was going to be plan A for kids for us. And so we had already had some conversations around adoption, but when we went to this orphanage and when we met these kids, oh man, God just had moved on our hearts that this was our son, this was our daughter. And so we actually went the reverse route to international adoption. At international adoption, you normally talk to an agency that's licensed in a certain country, and they go through the whole process of doing your home study and checking everything out and talking to all of your friends and family to make sure you're a safe person. And then they match you with a child in another country and you get to go and visit. We did things the reverse way. We had already been to the country. We had already met these kids. We had already decided that adoption was the route we wanted to go. But we didn't have an agency. And so we did our home study independently and we started the process. When we talked to the kids, this was kind of a feeding program as he was delivering food. When we talked to our kids about the idea of adoption, they were super excited. They said yes. They had already started calling my husband Dad. We were all in. It was just jumping into the deep end, filling out all of the paperwork. We did the whole approval process in only about 12 weeks, which is extremely fast. And so we did all of this paperwork, we had all of these meetings, we thought, okay, this is just gonna accelerate the process of bringing them home. But what we didn't know was that orphanage was not licensed to do adoptions. They were not connected to any agencies, they were not connected to any American resources, they were not even licensed to house kids. This was an underground trafficking ring. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into with our yes in 2010. So in 2011, when our paperwork was done and we were waiting to see if we could get the ball rolling with the paperwork on the Haitian side, all of a sudden it hit a huge standstill. This orphanage had been receiving tons of support from American churches, American missions teams. We took loads of Crocs shoes and Beanie Babies, and they were getting distributions of food all the time, and their actual name was Son of God. They were portrayed as a wonderful place where kids got an education, they got 3 meals a day, they got food and clothing, but none of that was happening. They were taking all the donations and selling them. And the trafficking ring, and I just want to share before I share what was happening, that this is a little bit graphic. I think you've probably all heard of human trafficking before. We tend to think of sex trafficking. Some of us also think labor trafficking, where kids are forced to work in brick kilns or in mines in other places like India. This was different. I was not prepared for this, but as reports kept coming back of the maltreatment of kids, as reports kept coming back of kids going missing, as reports kept coming back of resources that were delivered that were then gone just a few weeks later, they did an investigation, and this orphanage was a trafficking ring for human body parts. There is a red market in the world where the human body is worth $1 million. And so they take kids that are old enough, 12 and older, whose organs are mature enough for transplant surgeries. So if you cannot get on a transplant list here for a lung, a liver, a kidney, your retinas, tendons, ligaments, all the parts of the body can be reused because we have amazing science and technology. But if you can't get on a transplant list in a first world country, you can go to other countries and buy those things for cash. And so they were trafficking kids across the border. Haiti and Dominican Republic share an island. Dominican Republic is a second world country that has great hospitals and good doctors. So they were trafficking kids from this orphanage across the border to the Dominican Republic, killing them and taking their organs. I was wrecked. We gathered all of the different churches from around the region and around the nation that were supporting this orphanage, and we started a petition. We went to the Haitian government first saying, do you know what's happening here? You have to do something. Silence. Absolutely no response from the Haitian side. We went to US Congress, US government saying, this is happening over in Haiti. You're sending aid there after the earthquake. You have to do something. And nothing. Finally, we did a huge petition that had millions of signatures for CNN to run a human trafficking story on this orphanage. And you better bet that got some attention. CNN was about ready to send a film crew to Haiti in 2012 when the Haitian president got wind of this. And he knew that bad press for the country meant all of those funds going after the earthquake would stop. And so he agreed to close the orphanage. He agreed to shut it down and make sure that the 85 kids that were living there would have a safe place to go, they would have their needs met, and all of the traffickers would be arrested. Unfortunately, he doesn't run orphanages, so he needed to contact the head of social services in Haiti and say, hey, I'm shutting down this orphanage. I'm sending a bus and I'm sending my police to shut this orphanage down tomorrow. I just need you to find a place for 85 kids to go. He's not bringing them all home to his house. It turned out that the director of social services in Haiti was fully aware of the human trafficking ring and being paid under the table to keep it quiet. So the night before the raid happened on our kids' orphanage, she made a phone call. And when the bus got there and the police got there the next morning, that building was boarded up. There was not a single adult left there, and half the kids were missing. Our kids were missing. They were not rescued that day. There were 45 kids hiding under bunk beds, hiding in back closets, saying that they were told that when the police got there, they would be killed. So they were hiding from police. Talk about trauma. Half the kids were missing, and the ones that were left were just deathly afraid. Those kids ended up going to safe orphanages, and there was a whole crew of us in Haiti ready to connect with them and let them know everything was going to be okay now. But when we got to the boys' orphanage and the girls' orphanage that were slated to take all these kids, neither our son, James, or our daughter, Lori, were there. And so we knew we had a fight left. We contacted people who had worked at the orphanage or volunteered at the orphanage that were in Haiti. We offered to pay for any information about where these kids went. And it turns out that these kids were missing because the orphanage got kids in two ways. Some kids came because the parents couldn't take care of them anymore, and they said, hey, I can't supply food and resources for my kids. I need them to have a better life. They would have a better life here at this orphanage. The other way they got kids was to drive a bus into the countryside and tell really impoverished families, hey, we run a boarding school, and we'll give you kid 3 meals a day, and we'll make sure they have an education, and then we'll send them back to you. You can better bet that the families of those kids were going to be really angry if their kids went missing, so a lot of the kids got bused back to families, but not our 2 kids, because they knew that my husband Matt and I had something to do with their closure. And so it was an interesting time. My husband stayed in Haiti, and he was getting death threats. They were calling his Haitian phone and hanging up. They were calling and telling him that the traffickers were going to kill him. They were telling everyone they could that the white people were actually the human traffickers, and that we were the ones trying to sell kids across the border to the Dominican Republic. It was a mess. And so it took 3 months before we finally got a phone call saying that somebody knew that our kids were being held hostage in a home that was in the countryside. We found that out because a little girl escaped. She had been badly burned by the people at the orphanage, so they didn't want to leave her behind because there was evidence on her body of the type of hostility that they caused. But she had an opportunity to escape the place where they were holding her because they told her she could go bathe in the creek out back, and she used that as an opportunity to run away. Our daughter had been given the same opportunity to take a bath in that creek, and she too could have escaped and run away, but she stayed because our son, soon to be her brother, couldn't have escaped with her. She stayed for him. So we knew, we heard from that little girl that both of our kids were still alive and that they were being held in this house. We got attorneys involved. We got the US government involved. We were pleading with the Haitian government to do something. We put in a humanitarian parole application to extract our kids. If we could find them, could we extract them and do the adoption on US soil instead of waiting to do the adoption in Haiti? Because you see, once all of these trafficking reports came out, they halted all adoptions in Haiti. Every family that was trying to adopt kids in Haiti in 2012 knows about this scenario because all of their adoptions went on pause for almost 2 years. And so we had to wait. There was no help from the Haitian side. There was minimal help from the US side. We had an attorney in Haiti and then 2 attorneys in the United States. And we had to wait. I remember distinctly just laying on my bedroom floor, crying out to God because I didn't know if I would ever see my 2 kids again. My husband is in Haiti looking for them and getting death threats. It was that moment where it's like you lay it all down and say, God, what are you doing? And please help. Please show up and help. And then a week later, we get a phone call that our daughter had a birth mom who was still alive, who had heard about the orphanage closure on the radio. She contacted the people who ran the orphanage because she still had a phone number for them, and she arranged to pick her daughter up. After that happened, she found out that we had planned to adopt her daughter, which is what she wanted the whole time. She wanted to leave her daughter in an orphanage so she would actually get adopted by a family. And so even though she'd been told the white people were trying to traffic her daughter, Lori kept telling her mom, hey, these people love me. They want to actually adopt me. And so they reached out to Matt, and this was the day that he got to see her again. It was her very first time at a restaurant. They met there, and she was overjoyed to see her dad. Matt was able to talk to Lori's mom and see, hey, do you need support? Would you like to keep your daughter if we support her to go to school, if we support her with food? And her mom, who lives in absolute abject poverty, said, no, this was my dream for her all along. I want her to have a life I couldn't have given her. So she was fully on board. But at this point, we still couldn't find our son. It was 6 more months before we got any information about where he was being held. He had been dumped. The people that were running the orphanage, the traffickers, didn't want to be caught with him. They wanted to unload all of these kids because they didn't want to get arrested. But he was just handed off at a prayer service to a pastor and his wife who were just housing him like 20 minutes from the airport. So we finally got information about that. We flew to Haiti, and this was the day that walking down the streets of that little village in Haiti, we just ended up walking into our son. He was right there playing in the street with some other street kids, and he was overjoyed to jump into Dad's arms. So now we have both kids, but we have no paperwork. adoptions are shut down, everything's a mess in the country, and they were ratifying new procedures that would help eliminate trafficking. If you've heard of anything in the international adoption world, you've heard of the Hague Convention, and it's a bunch of laws to help reduce trafficking in other countries. But the Hague laws are very strict to say that you have to be matched with a child that's in an orphanage that does adoptions. You can meet the child beforehand, and you can never meet the biological parents. Oh man, we had met both biological moms. Our kids are not related, so it turned out our son had a biological mom that was still around. She also wanted her son adopted. So we've met biological parents. We already know our kids. The orphanage is not licensed. They're not even in orphanages at this point. We're kind of having their biological moms foster them, kind of like Moses was fostered before he ended up getting to go back to his Jewish family. He was fostered by Pharaoh's family. And so it's just very interesting because we were looking at this scenario like this is absolutely impossible. It's impossible to do all of the right paperwork. It's impossible to meet the new Hague guidelines. It feels so much more than us, but God kept saying to walk forward one step at a time, one piece of paperwork at a time. We continued over those several years to lead missions trips. I've now been to Haiti 26 times. I led 18 missions teams. My husband's been 40 times, and he gave out hundreds of microfinance loans during that time. We got to absolutely support the reconstruction of multiple churches and multiple cities in Haiti, and bring multiple people with us from our church. So it was a wonderful time, but every single time I left, this is a picture from one of our trips because we would take an ocean day and get to see some of the beautiful parts of Haiti. But every single time I left without my kids. And as a mom, that completely shattered my heart. I knew that they had already had trauma at the orphanage. There's marks on their bodies from being whipped with wires and cut with knives. They were seeing sexual abuse happen right in front of them. And again, they were kidnapped and held hostage. This was the worst of the worst. But now I was causing more repeated trauma because I would come for a week, love on them for a week, provide for them for a week, and then I left 25 times without my kids. So this was happening over the course of many, many years. It was not until July of 2017 that our kids finally were approved to come home. The Haitian government finally did all of the approvals. The U.S. Embassy, who grants visas, finally said, yes, they are going to be U.S. citizens. We will grant all of the approvals. We had waited and waited and waited for these kids to be in our family. And finally, on July 26th of 2017, we were able to bring them home. Thank you. Yes, it was a special moment. That's at the Sacramento airport. Our kids were all dressed up and so excited. We had a sea of friends and family waiting right below that escalator in the airport that you've probably all seen. And so they were like celebrities. There was so much joy. There was such a warm welcome for them. Our daughter literally went down the escalator like Miss America. She was waving at all the people down below, ready to welcome her into her new life here in the United States. None of this should have happened. They should have stayed in Haiti, given the new laws. Every step of the way, there was this releasing of what I could do, because my abilities, my advocacy, all the paperwork I signed, all of the funds that we sent, none of that was enough to bring our kids home. That had to be a miracle of God. And I have a plaque in my family room that says, the will of God will not take you where the grace of God will not protect you. And I clung to that over and over and over again as it just seemed impossible. There were so many dark moments, so many tears on our kids' part and on our part. We would call them over the phone and get to talk a little bit. We learned Haitian Creole so we could communicate with them, because when they came home in 2017, they were not speaking English. And so there was an uphill battle the whole way. And yet God has written a story that involves both of them being a part of my family. And he's writing that story for each one of us. Here is a picture about a year later. Now they're 17 and 19 years old. This picture was a couple of years ago. They've been home in the United States for 6 years, and it hasn't still been easy. I kept promising God, I'll write this story in a book, or I'll share it on a stage. I'd do whatever you want to do, God, because you get all of the glory. But I really want it to have a happy ending, because I feel like if I'm going to share this with people, it really needs to have that happy ending, bow on top, cherry on top, whatever. And it's honestly been very hard. The trauma that they both came with has disrupted their ability to attach. It's disrupted their ability to trust other people. As you can imagine, all of the adults around them for the first 6 and 10 years of their life were awful. They were abusive and harmful and not to be trusted. So it's taken a very long time to build up their character and their identity, to help them feel safe both in our home and in this country. Also to just feel safe in their own bodies and not think that there's no food. Like our son literally does fridge checks still to make sure that he wants to know in the morning what's for dinner every night still. Part of that's because he's a 17-year-old boy and likes to eat, but part of it's because he went so many years without food. They might get a plate of rice and beans once a day. They might have gotten a piece of chicken once a week. Talk about nutrient deficiencies and limited growth. When we brought our son home, he was 10 years old, but he looked like he was 6. He is definitely underweight. He came home with medical conditions. Our daughter, who's the older one, remembers everything that she ever saw. And she still has a chip on her shoulder that says, the world has not been kind to me. I don't want to be kind back. And so parenting in this place of trauma is not easy, but it is so redeeming. I want to share the word that God shared with me throughout the whole time. He kept saying more. He kept saying, there's more of me when you need it, when you don't have enough. He kept saying, there's more that I'm doing in you and through you, because I felt like I had a vanilla testimony. I grew up in church. I've loved Jesus my whole life. I was baptized when I was 7. I did vacation Bible schools. I did a program called Pioneer Girls, which is like Girl Scouts, and you get badges just for learning Bible verses. Like I just had a really, I didn't have that moment of transformation because I had always been in relationship with Jesus. And so I was wondering, like, how do I share that story and how do I share transformation? Well, this was my transformative moment because God called me into something that was far bigger than me. And he says, I'm going to give you a heart that pursues these kids no matter what, no matter how much money you spend, no matter how many trips to Haiti it takes, no matter how long it takes, because I'm teaching you to exemplify how I pursue all of my kids. That's what he's doing for all of us. He is chasing after us no matter how far away we are, no matter what we do, no matter what circumstances are happening in our life. He loves us so much that he's not giving up. He's not backing down. He's running after us with his whole heart, and there's more for us to experience of his love, and there's more for us to do to show his love to other people. So I ended up stepping away from my physical therapy job. I still treat patients 1 day a week, but I launched a church ministry first in 2012 while waiting for my kids to come home, because I think that there are so many things that we here in America take for granted, and if we can help the vulnerable kids and families right here in our community, the foster youth, the refugee youth, the homeless youth, the kids that really need somebody to show up for them, if we can do that well here, they'll know Jesus as well. That led into getting to launch what Farmer said is the Alliance, a nonprofit that I founded 7.5 years ago. A nonprofit that really is more of a movement than an individual nonprofit, because we bring together all of the agencies and churches and nonprofits and professionals that are serving those populations here in our region, so we could actually work together instead of separately. There's more. There's more we can do together. There's more kids and families in our region that are experiencing trauma on a daily basis. A new study said that 2/3 of kids before they turn 16 have a major traumatic event in their life. Of all kids, not just low-income neighborhood kids, not just refugees coming from Ukraine or Afghanistan. This is all kids. So there's more that we can do. And if we're fully qualified to do it, it's called our profession. I'm a fully qualified physical therapist. I went to school, I have my degree, I've been practicing for 17 years. This is not what I'm qualified to do, to speak to you or to lead a nonprofit. That's my calling because it required me to take a leap of faith. that said yes to adoption, that said yes to fighting a human trafficking ring, that said yes to starting a church ministry, that said yes to starting a nonprofit, and that says yes to sharing my story before it has a fully happy ending, because we are still dealing with the impacts of trauma for a 17 and 19-year-old on a daily basis. But it's good. And so I just want to close out by praying for you this morning, because I feel like each one of you has your own impossible. I want you to think about it for a minute. What feels insurmountable or overwhelming, but you know you're called to it? Maybe it's that exam next week, but maybe it's something bigger. Maybe it's a calling. Maybe you're called to adopt someday. Maybe God's asking you to step out in faith and follow him in an area of your life that feels hard. But as you're thinking about that impossible thing, he is already waiting to give you the faith for it. And faith is the evidence of things unseen. Our adoption took 6.5 years to complete from start to finish. I'm really glad I didn't know that before I signed my first home study document. God is so kind that he doesn't tell us how hard things are going to be when he's asking us to say yes to them, because most of us wouldn't. I wouldn't. It was so hard. But he's saying just one step at a time, one yes at a time, because he has enough for all of us in those moments. So I'm just going to close this out in prayer before you head off to class, but think about those impossibilities in your life, because I want to pray for you for faith and perseverance and trust in those areas. So Jesus, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for World Adoption Day tomorrow, and that you've come for all of us. You've adopted all of us into your family. You're pursuing our hearts. You're pursuing right relationship. You're restoring and redeeming when the world tells us that relationships are scary. God, I thank you for healing our hearts and for designing us to be in relationships, for setting the lonely in families through adoption and through our natural families. God, this morning, I just am burdened by the impossible, the situations in each of our lives, my life and the lives of everyone in this room, that feel overwhelming, but we also know they're from you. And so I pray for faith. I pray that, like we sang earlier, that we're standing on a firm foundation, knowing that you are a God who can do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine, that you are a God who pursues and fights for us. We just have to stand still, that you are a God that equips us to do the good work you set before us. And so, God, I just pray that you would break down those walls of impossibilities, that you would give us perseverance and stamina to stay in it when it feels heavy and dark and hard. And I pray that each one of us would go out today with more faith than we came in with, because you are writing scripts and stories for our lives that we could not imagine, but they are good, even when they are hard. And so, God, I just thank you for your love for us and for making us part of your family. In Jesus' name, amen.